Are you tired of hearing people say, "Oh, that's fake news," whenever they hear something they wish were different or just don't like? Or perhaps you wonder if what you're hearing is really true, even when it comes from people we should be able to look up to. I sometimes yearn for simpler times when the things seemed to make more sense, when good was good and bad was bad. These days it's all mixed up, isn't it? My name is Ian Currey and this is Thinking Out Loud. Come on, let me tell you what I think. Living here in the southern states of America, wildlife is very different to where I grew up. When we first moved here, I looked at the lovely big garden behind our house and thought of all the wonderful vegetables we could grow. Ooh, I wondered why nobody I knew had a vegetable garden. It's really not hard to do. Push a few poles into the ground, put some string around them, plant beans, and watch them grow. Easy. I mean, hasn't anyone heard of Jack and the Beanstalk? No? I planted the beans, and sure enough, after a few days, up popped the first shoots. Not long after, the shoots started climbing the poles and wrapping themselves around the string. Smugly, I thought, oh, this is easy. Then, one morning, they were gone. I mean, everything, right down to the ground. Rabbits. That's what it must be, rabbits. It wasn't too late in the season, so I planted some more, but this time putting a mesh fence around the base of the poles. I'll show those pesky wabbits. This time, the beans grew taller and even a few beans started forming. But then again, one night, gone. Of course, it wasn't rabbits at all, but deer. They cleaned up. They'd done everything except leave me a thank you note for the fresh vegetables. Around here, it's almost impossible to avoid unintentionally feeding deer. Now, lovely as they are to watch, their presence means a whole lot more difficult to grow anything. Wildlife differs so much from what I'm used to back in England. And when I first told my friends in England, we have deer in our garden, they couldn't imagine I was right. I mean, maybe one or two here and there occasionally, but deer don't live right in the city, right? Well, around here they do. Some days we don't see any at all, but those days are few and far between. This morning, the newborn twins were apparently bounding around the lawn at top speed, making hoof marks all over the place. Lovely. Some years ago, a friend's child was looking out of their living room window when the child said, "Come quick and see the bear." And you mean the deer, dear? No, mummy, I mean bear. Well, there are no bears around here, so you must be seeing things. Eventually, our friend came to see what their son was looking at. And sure enough, there in the front yard was a big brown bear lolloping across their lawn. Whilst unusual, bears do live in Georgia, mostly in the North Georgia mountains, and only very occasionally come on holiday this far south. Deer are commonplace, but bears? I mean, I've never seen one around here. Let me put it this way. Dozens of deer live in our yard, but only one bear has ever been seen here. Accurate? It's interesting, isn't it? There are deer living in our yard, but not dozens. Maybe dozens visit their friends from time to time, but the most I've ever seen at once in the back is 10. The statement, "dozens of deer live in our yard," would be inaccurate, but easy to slip in there because we'd just been talking about the bear. But there's another problem. I said, only one bear has ever been seen here. Well, that part isn't true either. Our friend only saw one on that day, but the bear was travelling with its much bigger mother. Two then. No, another neighbour has seen several bears over the decades they've lived here, so neither part of my statement is actually true. But does it matter? I mean, saying dozens of deer live out there conveys the idea, and only ever one bear is almost right. Right? Well, let's look at it another way. One of the things we teach new flight crew is that accuracy is important. Being off on your flight path by just 1 degree can have a huge impact. Leaving from Los Angeles on a long flight to Rome, Italy, takes you out across the Atlantic on a journey of over 6,000 miles. If you manage to be off course by 1 degree to the north, you'll find yourself somewhere in Austria. 1 degree to the south, and you'll end up in Tunisia, Africa. Do you see how such a small deviation from accuracy can make a huge difference? Sadly, these days, with information overload, a normal thing for most of us, the danger is that we believe a tiny part of something that isn't true, and it leads us down a path that is so far off track that it's likely to cause real harm before we even know there are actually bears living in Georgia. So how do we know what is true and what is fake and misleading? You can't take the average. I mean, listening to all the ideas and so-called facts and then trying to take a middle road allows the overwhelming nonsense to pull you off track. And as we've seen, unless you particularly want to end up in Tunisia, let's not get a degree off course with our thinking. So how do you know who to listen to? Who has the truth? Who can we trust? Cutting through the forest of lies and deceit is so hard, isn't it? John had a good bit to say about this all those years ago. This problem appears to be nothing new. First of all, eliminating listening to people who claim to be without fault seems like a good idea. If we claim to have no sin, we're only fooling ourselves and not living in the truth. I've never done anything wrong makes it easier to ignore there are dozens of bears living in my garden. Hearing a person who constantly can't admit to mistakes or fault and always blames someone else for everything that ever goes wrong on their watch, it should make them easy to spot as untrustworthy. Another big problem these days is people wanting to believe things that aren't true. They wish they could reject something because their old way of thinking isn't supported by the facts. Once again, nothing new. Our old friend Paul writes, "A time is coming when people will no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires and will look for teachers who tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear. They will reject the truth and chase after myths." Some of my friends are busily smiling smugly to themselves at this point. What you might think Paul is saying is condemning all those things you don't like about the way things are these days. The caution I'd give you there is to remember our plane flying to Italy. While we don't want to land in Tunisia, we don't want to land in Austria either. Those people believing all that junk and doing all that new stuff might just have a grain of truth that corrects the course you are on with your old stuck in the mud ways and ideas. I'm not helping here, am I? I mean, telling you to watch out and avoid listening to people who can't seem to admit their mistakes doesn't tell you Who to listen to? Now, does it? Who can you trust? How about listening to what Jesus said about truth and direction? Jesus was addressing his disciples on how the future looked and the path they needed to take to God. Responding to a specific question from Thomas, Jesus told them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus claiming he is the truth makes listening to him kind of important, doesn't it? Ultimately, not just listening to what people say, but watching how they act. Do they act with integrity? Do they do what they say they're going to? Do they admit their faults and refuse to go near the dark side, as it were? It's the only way we can stay on course. God's light came into the world, but people loved darkness more than the light, for their actions were evil. All who do evil hate the light and refuse to go near it for fear their sins will be exposed. But those who do what is right come to the light so others can see they are doing what God wants. Do you actually want to stay on course, or do you kind of like the fake, the darkness, the way you want things to be, the way things once were? I hear Tunisia can be really hot at this time of year. Until next time, goodbye.